Hello and welcome to this audio commentary on the sound used in films. In this video I'll be analysing multiple sound techniques in filmmaking. We'll start with rhythm. Good public speakers employ a wide range of techniques to emphasise and exaggerate what they're saying, adding emphasis to the important parts of their speech. Some of these techniques include pauses, speaking rhythmically, and volume. Here I'm using an example from Lord of the Rings. I chose this scene because Gollum talks rhythmically within it. His speech follows a very specific rhythm and is almost poetic.
Gandalf told me you were one of the river folk.
Cold me heart and hand in bone, and cold we travellers far from home.
He said your life was a sad story.
They do not see what lies ahead when sun has failed and moon is dead.
In this scene, the rhythm is mirrored between Frodo and Gollum, which adds symmetry to the back and forth between the two characters.
Smeagol.
Next we have sound effects. Sound effects come in many forms. You have diegetic sounds that come from within the frame, and the opposite to these are non-diegetic sounds, which are sounds that you can still hear but they don't come from within the frame. In this example from Shaun of the Dead, sound effects are used to emphasise the montage. The sounds are added when key actions are carried out, which adds a lot to the comedy of the piece.
We take Pete's car, we drive over to Mum's, we go in, take care of Philip. I'm so sorry, Philip.
Next up we have music. Music within film is used to accompany and sometimes drive visuals. For example, the peaks and troughs in music where it reaches its loudest and quietest parts directly correlate with what's happening on the screen. It can be used to add tension, suspense, and a variety of other feelings. In this example, again from Lord of the Rings, the music matches the characters' emotions as they begin to panic. It becomes loud and dramatic when they're fighting.
The Horn of Gondor.
And as Boromir dies, the music becomes quieter and softer, which emphasises the pain that the characters are going through as he dies. Then there's fidelity. Fidelity is sound that you would expect to hear from what you see. Therefore, a lack of fidelity means that the sound is not what you'd expect to hear. Sound that has fidelity often just backs up what's going on in the frame and adds to the audience's immersion. Whereas sound that has a lack of fidelity is more often used to change the tone and feel of the scene. This is because it can make the audience perceive the film in a different way. Here I'm using Tom and Jerry as an example. A lot of the sounds here are sound effects and they have fidelity as they are the sounds that you'd expect to hear from what's going on in the frame. However, some of these sounds have a lack of fidelity as they're sounds from other things like bangs and crashes that the creators used because they thought it would emphasise the action more. Then there's parallel sound. Parallel sound is similar to fidelity in the sense that it's what you would expect to hear alongside the visuals. For example, the use of specific genres of music for certain films, such as soft acoustic music for a romantic scene, or loud, intense, or cinematic music for a large battle. The example I'm using here is Jaws. This is a brilliant example of parallel sound because the music creates the exact tension that you feel as we see the shark's point of view approaching the swimmers slowly. Next there's contrapuntal sound. Contrapuntal sound is unusual sound for the scene or opposite to the mood of the visuals. This often comes across as unexpected and sometimes jarring, which has its uses when shaping the sound of the film. It's quite commonly seen in comedy, such as my example here from Anchorman.
Cruise control just regulates speed. It doesn't steer. Come again?
Here the music as the RV flips is slow and soft. This is completely opposite to what's actually happening in the scene, which creates comedy. Another important sound technique is timing. Timing of sound can have a huge impact on how the film is perceived. Sound is often just as impactful as visuals. Often when approaching a key moment, the sound will slowly build, creating a rise in tension, and then just before the important moment, it will fall silent for a moment. This element of timing and the change in dynamics adds a huge amount of impact to the sounds that follow. In this example from The Walking Dead, there's a slow rise in sound as the tension builds as the van is clearly rocking towards the edge of the bridge. And then just as it's about to fall, the sound cuts out completely and there's silence. Then there's no sound again until the van hits the ground, which makes the action even more emphasised. Next we have synchronous sound. When sound is synchronous, it means it matches certain movements or actions on the screen. A common example of this would be footsteps as a character is walking or the sound of a car pulling off. My example here is just my recent trip to Comic-Con, purely because there's no chance of me getting copyrighted for using this footage. The opposite of synchronous sound is asynchronous sound. Asynchronous sound is when the sound is out of sync with the visuals. This is rarely used for exactly that reason, but can be used occasionally to create a specific effect, such as jarring the audience out of the film or making them feel uncomfortable or confused. This is commonly seen in films that employ voiceovers, as we hear the sound but never actually see the person talking. My example here is from the TV show Arrow, just because it's the first voiceover that I could think of.
My name is Oliver Queen. For 5 years I was stranded on an island with only one goal: survive.
And lastly, we have volume. Volume can be used for a variety of effects. An increase in volume in speech can suggest anger or passion. An increased rise in music volume can create tension and suggest that something is coming. Loud sound effects can be used if there's a lot going on in the scene, but you want to be able to hear something specifically. For example, in a battle scene, if you want to hear someone talking, then their voice volume would be increased, but the volume of, say, the battle sounds, such as the swords clashing in the background, would be decreased. Alternatively, quiet sound can have quite the opposite effect. For example, quiet speech can suggest someone is scared or tired. Quiet music can also add suspense or tension, but can also be used in a less intense scene, such as background music for atmospheric purposes. And lastly, quiet sound effects can be used for more subtle purposes that make the scene feel more realistic. For example, adding non-diegetic sounds in the background of a scene to further immerse the audience. My example is the battle scene from the end of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, because it has all the loud sound effects of the swords clashing and the fighting in the background, and it also has Aragorn's speech at the beginning, which starts off quite quiet, and by the end of it he's shouting and trying to inspire confidence in the men.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. I bid you stand, men of the West!
Ironically enough, in this clip the audio is actually out of sync with the video, but I thought I'd leave it the way it is instead of correcting it because it's another example of asynchronous sound.
I bid you